This is the Manhattan Transfer, American jazz vocal group founded in 1969 in New York City. Now, if you're looking for one of the best American jazz vocal groups of all time, a vocal group that's won 11 Grammy Awards and has been together for over 40 years, you came to the right place. This video will examine the life and music of the Manhattan Transfer. Welcome back to my channel. The Manhattan Transfer was an American vocal group founded in 1969 in New York City, performing musical genres like a cappella, Brazilian jazz, swing, vocalese, rhythm and blues, pop, and standards. They have won 11 Grammy Awards. There have been several incarnations and formations of the Manhattan Transfer, with each edition having different styles. The first and original rendition was in the 1960s, consisting of a mostly a cappella tinged style. It featured Tim Hauser, Aaron Dickens, Marty Nelson, Pat Rosalia, and Gene Pistilli. The second version of the group, formed in 1972, incorporating a more vocal jazz approach, consisted of Hauser, Alan Paul, Janice Siegel, and Laurel Massey. The third and most commercially perceived formation of the group happened in 1979 because Massey had to leave the group after being badly injured in a car crash and was replaced by Cheryl Benteen. This edition of the Manhattan Transfer performed electric-style pop, soul, funk, and rhythmic music, having success in the 1980s. The group's fourth edition, since the 1990s, originally consisted of Hauser, Paul, Siegel, and Benteen, and performed mostly cool and smooth jazz. It also had several rotating touring members, and longtime pianist Yaron Gershovsky accompanied the group on tour and served as musical director. Tris Curlis from the Los Angeles a cappella group MPAC became a permanent member in October 2014 following Hauser's death. The early years. In 1969, Tim Hauser formed a vocal group in New York City called the Manhattan Transfer after the novel by John Dos Passos. The group consisted of Hauser, Aaron Dickens, Marty Nelson, Pat Rosalia, and Gene Pistilli. This group made one album, Junkin', on Capitol Records in 1971, which looked at the jazz music of the past as well as rock and country genres, unlike the later incarnations of the group. They were not picked up by Capitol Records for a second album, and the group broke up in 1973. Shortly thereafter, Hauser met Laurel Massey while he was a cab driver, and she was his passenger. Soon after, he met Janice Siegel. During this time, session drummer Roy Markowitz, who had played with Janis Joplin and recorded with Don McLean, attended a performance of the group and convinced Tim to change the group's direction. Roy was in the Broadway band of Grease and introduced one of its cast members, Alan Paul, who played the dual role of bandleader Johnny Casino and the Teen Angel, to Tim. Thus began another version of the Manhattan Transfer. After performing in clubs in New York City, the quartet asked Roy to produce a demo to present to Ahmet Ertegun at Atlantic Records. The demo was a success, and Atlantic released its debut album with guest appearances by bona fide jazz musicians Randy Brecker, John Faddis, and Zoot Sims. The Manhattan Transfer album was released on Atlantic in 1975, presenting itself as a vocalese rendition of Java Jive and Tuxedo Junction, scoring a top 25 hit with a gospel-tinged operator. During the month of August 1975, the group hosted a 4-week variety series on CBS TV. The hour-long show was simply called The Manhattan Transfer, aired on Sunday evenings, and for the most part concentrated on showcasing the talents of the group. Their next album, coming out in 1976, produced Chanson d'Amour, which was a #1 hit in the UK and Ireland. In 1978, Laurel Massey was in a car crash and dropped out of the group. She was replaced with Cheryl Benteen. The group's next album, Extensions, on Atlantic in 1979, produced the hit Twilight Zone, Twilight Tone, a song based on the TV series The Twilight Zone, including an impersonation of Rod Serling's narration from Alan Paul. Extensions featured a cover version of Birdland, an instrumental by the jazz fusion group Weather Report, with lyrics by John Hendricks of Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. One of the most popular jazz recordings in 1980, Birdland won the Grammy Award for Best Jazz Fusion Performance, while Janice Siegel won the Grammy Award for Best Vocal Arrangement. In 1981, the Manhattan Transfer made music history by becoming the first group to win the Grammy Awards for both popular and jazz categories in the same year. The Boy from New York City, a cover of the 1965 success by the Ad-Libs, reached the top 10 on the Hot 100 and won them the award for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals. And Until I Met You earned them a Grammy Award for Best Jazz Vocal Performance, Duo or Group. Both of these songs appeared on the group's fifth album, Mecca for Moderns, on Atlantic Records in 1981. In 1982, the group won another Grammy for Best Jazz Vocal Performance, Duo or Group for its rendition of Route 66. The group was featured on the soundtrack of the Burt Reynolds film Sharky Machine. In September 1983, the group released the album Bodies and Souls with an urban contemporary style, which resulted in 2 R&B chart singles. The first was a #2 hit, Spice of Life, which was co-written by former Heatwave member Rod Templeton, who had penned several hits for Michael Jackson. The single also reached #40 on the US pop chart and #19 in the UK. The other single, the ballad Mystery, was later covered by Anita Baker on her 1986 album Rapture. In 1985, the group released 2 albums. The first was Bop Doo Wop, which included both live and studio recordings, and the second was Vocalese, which received 12 Grammy nominations, at the time making it second only to Michael Jackson's Thriller as the most nominated single album ever. The group won in 2 categories, Best Jazz Vocal Performance, Duo or Group, and Best Arrangement for Voices. This was followed by a live recording of many of these songs titled Live. This concert, recorded in Japan, was also released on VHS and DVD, later titled Vocalese Live. For their next album, Brazil, in 1987, the group headed south to work with Brazilian songwriters and musicians. Brazil won a Grammy for the Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal. The group did not release any studio albums again until 1991, when they signed with Sony Music Label and released The Offbeat of Avenue, featuring original material written or co-written by members of the quartet. Their efforts brought them their 10th Grammy Award for the song Sassy. This was followed by the release of their first holiday album entitled The Christmas Album in 1992. Switching back to Atlantic Records as their distributor, they released Tonin', a collection of R&B and popular successes from the 1960s. The Manhattan Transfer meets Tubby the Tuba, a children's album, and their 1997 album Swing, which covered 1930s era swing music. Their final album for Atlantic was The Spirit of St. Louis in 2000, dedicated to the music of Louis Armstrong. The group was inducted into the Vocal Hall of Fame in 1998. The group signed with Telarc label in 2003 to release Couldn't Be Hotter, a live performance capturing many of the songs from The Spirit of St. Louis. In 2004, the group released Vibrate, blending original tunes with older ones, pops, jazz, and funk. Vibrate featured notable musicians such as bassist Will Lee and Steve Haas on drums. They also released first in Japan their second holiday album, An Acapella Christmas, in 2005. The album was released in the US in 2006. During 2006, the group released the Symphony Sessions, a collection of some of their best known songs re-recorded with an orchestra, and also the Definitive Pop Collection, a 2-disc collection of the group's material from the Atlantic record period. They also recorded their first original title song from a movie, Trail of the Screaming Forehead, which was broadcast by PBS. The Chick Corea Songbook, a tribute to the works of that American jazz musician, was released in September 2009. The album features an appearance of Corea himself on the track Free Samba. Other prominent musicians on the recording were Scott Kinsley, Steve Haas, Jimmy Earle, and Christian McBride. In 2011, the Manhattan Transfer worked on an album of previously recorded but never finished songs to honor their 40th anniversary. One of the highlights of the album was the vocalese version of George and Ira Gershwin's The Man I Loved, based on an Artie Shaw and his orchestra performance of the composition, which had originally been slated for the Swing album. The Manhattan Transfer performed their final concert on December 15, 2023 at the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. I hope you enjoyed this video on one of the most successful jazz vocal groups of all time, the Manhattan Transfer. Now, if you've got a band or artist you'd like featured on this YouTube channel, pop it in the comments section. I'll make another video. Thanks for dropping by. Rock on.